daughter and I put on the best act of our lives that weekend. And I still think about it sometimes. Usually late at night when the house is quiet and I can hear the wind coming off the lake. I think about how close I came to losing her. Not just to him, but to my own silence. Let me tell you what happened. Her name is Leanne. She's 31 years old, and she has her mother's laugh. Loud and sudden, the kind that fills a room before you even know what's funny. Her mother passed 8 years ago. Breast cancer. It was the hardest thing either of us ever went through, and it changed Leanne in ways I still don't fully understand. Made her quieter in some places, more urgent in others. Like she'd learned the hard way that time doesn't wait. So when she told me she'd met someone, I tried to be happy for her. I really did. His name was Theo Marsden. He was 36, worked in commercial real estate out of a downtown Toronto office, drove a black Audi that always looked freshly washed. He had the kind of handshake that men practice. Firm, deliberate, eye contact held just a beat too long. The first time I met him, we sat across from each other at Leanne's kitchen table in her condo in the annex, and he asked me thoughtful questions about my years working in civil engineering. He listened when I answered, or he seemed to. I told myself I was being a suspicious old man. They got engaged 14 months after they met. Leanne called me from the parking lot of a restaurant in Yorkville. I could hear that her voice was shaking, and I thought something was wrong until she said, "Dad, he proposed." He proposed, and I said yes. And I sat down on the edge of my bed in my house in Kingston and told her I was happy. Because she sounded happy. And that was enough for me, or so I thought. The wedding was set for the second Saturday of October, Thanksgiving weekend, which some of her friends thought was odd. "You'll never have a free Thanksgiving again," her maid of honor joked. But Leanne liked the idea. She said she wanted the leaves to be turning. She wanted it to look like the world was on fire in the best possible way. They booked a venue about 40 minutes outside the city. An old property up near Caledon, a restored farmhouse with a long laneway lined with maple trees. It was beautiful, the kind of place you see on the cover of a bridal magazine and assume only exists for the photo. I drove up the Thursday before the wedding to help with setup. Leanne had 100 things to manage, and Theo had offered to handle the vendor coordination that afternoon, so she asked if I could be there to receive the florals and help organize the reception hall. Of course I said yes. I'd have driven to Halifax if she'd asked. I arrived around noon. The property manager showed me where everything was going and handed me a clipboard with a checklist. I spent the first couple of hours moving chairs, signing off on deliveries, texting Leanne updates. Around 2:30 I went looking for the washroom, which I'd been told was down a back hallway near the old kitchen. I found the hallway. I heard voices before I rounded the corner. I stopped walking without deciding to. Theo was standing near a window at the far end of the hall. His back was partly turned. He was on his phone, and he was laughing, not the careful, considerate laugh I'd seen him use at dinners with Leanne's family. Something looser. Uglier. "Relax," he was saying. "It's 2 days away. 2 days." I should have kept walking. I know that. But something in his tone made my feet stay exactly where they were. "Listen to me," he said, lowering his voice, but not enough. "Once we're married, the dynamic shifts completely. Her RRSP alone is close to 400,000. And the property in Kingston. She's the only beneficiary. That's the whole point." A pause. "No, her dad doesn't suspect anything. He's a sweet old guy. He wants to believe I'm good for her." Another pause, and then a sound that I can only describe as contemptuous. "She's trusting. That's always been the easy part." I stood in that hallway for what felt like a very long time. My daughter's RRSP, her inheritance. The house in Kingston, my house, the one I'd told Leanne would go to her when I was gone. Theo knew those details because Leanne had shared them with him. Because she trusted him. Because she was planning to spend her life with him. I did not move. I did not make a sound. He finished the call a minute later, maybe 2. I heard him walk toward the main hall. I pressed myself back against the wall and waited until I couldn't hear his footsteps anymore. Then I went outside and sat in my truck in the parking area and stared at the steering wheel. I am 63 years old. I spent 35 years as a structural engineer. I have built things meant to last. Bridges, foundations, load-bearing systems that hold weight for decades. I know something about what happens when you rush a decision. I know what it costs when you skip a step. I sat in that truck for 45 minutes. The first thing I wanted to do was walk back inside and put my hands around Theo Marsden's collar and ask him to explain himself slowly and clearly. I am not a violent man, but I will not pretend the thought wasn't there. The second thing I wanted to do was call Leanne immediately, tell her everything, stop the wedding before it went any further. But here's the thing I kept coming back to. I had heard a phone conversation. I had no recording. I had no proof. And Theo was exactly the kind of man who would look at my daughter with soft eyes and say, "Leanne, I'm worried about your father. I think the stress of all this has gotten to him." And she would be standing in her wedding dress 2 days before the ceremony, and she would not know who to believe. I needed proof. I drove back to my hotel in Brampton, sat at the small desk in my room, and thought it through the way I used to think through engineering problems. What are the variables? What do I actually know? What do I need to know, and how do I get there? I called my younger brother that evening. He's retired RCMP, 30 years on the force, the last 8 in financial crimes. I told him what I'd heard. He listened without interrupting, which is always how you know he's taking something seriously. "Don't confront him," he said when I finished. "Not yet. You need him on record. The wedding's in 2 days." "I know. Can you get near him again?" "Tomorrow. There's a rehearsal dinner. Then tomorrow." I did not sleep well. The rehearsal dinner was at the farmhouse. About 40 people, close family, wedding party, a few old friends. Leanne wore a dark green dress and had her hair done and looked so much like her mother that I had to look away for a moment when she walked in. Theo stood beside her, working the room with the ease of someone who'd done it his whole life. He hugged people. He laughed at the right moments. He was very, very good. I watched him. After dinner, the wedding party moved to a sitting room off the main hall for a toast. I excused myself to get some air and walked around the outside of the building. There was a small terrace off the back of the old kitchen, the same back hallway where I'd stood the day before. Through the window, I could see the catering staff clearing tables. Then I saw Theo step outside through a side door with his best man. His name was Kyle. I'd met him twice before, an old university friend who worked in insurance. They both had drinks in hand. They stood on the terrace maybe 6 or 7 feet from where I was standing in the shadow of the building. My phone was already in my hand. I opened the voice memo app and pressed record. Then I stayed very still. "You nervous?" Kyle asked. "Not even a little," Theo said. "Honestly, the ceremony part is the easy part. I could do this in my sleep." "She has no idea?" "About what?" Theo laughed. "No. She thinks I'm in love with her." Kyle's voice dropped. "And the father?" "Like I told you, he's just a nice old retired guy who wants to walk his daughter down the aisle. He's not looking at the numbers." A pause. "By the time she figures out anything is wrong, we'll have been married 2 years. At that point, half of everything is legally mine anyway." Kyle was quiet for a moment. "Then you're sure about this?" "I've been sure about this since month 3, Theo said. "I gave it enough time that it looks real." "That's all you have to do." They went back inside a few minutes later. I stood there in the dark with my phone still recording. I stopped the memo and listened back to 30 seconds of it, just to confirm what I had. The audio wasn't perfect. There was some wind, some ambient noise from inside, but his voice was clear, unmistakable. I had what I needed. Now I had to decide what to do with it. I did not sleep at all that night. By 4 in the morning, I had made my decision, and by 5:30 I had driven back to the farmhouse and asked the overnight property manager if I could sit in the main hall. He was a kind man who assumed I was a nervous father and brought me a coffee without being asked. I called Leanne at 8 o'clock. "Dad?" She sounded foggy. "It's early." "I know. I need you to come meet me at the venue. Just you. Don't tell Theo." There was a long pause. "Dad, you're scaring me." "I know. I'm sorry. But I need you to trust me the way I've always trusted you. Can you do that?" She was there by 9:15. I played her the recording. I watched her face while she listened. She was sitting across from me at one of the long reception tables, still in her coat, her coffee going cold beside her. She listened all the way through without saying a word. Then she asked me to play it again. So I did. When it finished the second time, she sat very still for almost a full minute. "How long have you known?" she said finally. "I heard something yesterday that I couldn't prove. Last night I got the recording." She nodded, very slowly, the way she used to nod as a child when she was trying not to cry. "What do I do?" she said. And I told her what I thought. All of it. Every option I'd turned over in my mind through the long night. We could cancel immediately, call everyone, explain nothing, or explain everything, deal with the fallout. We could go to a lawyer before we did anything, or we could do what my brother had actually suggested when I'd called him at midnight. We could let the wedding happen, and we could let Theo believe he'd won. Leanne looked at me for a long time. "You think he's done this before," she said. "Your uncle thinks so too." Another long pause. "Then let's make sure he can't do it again." The wedding ceremony was at 2:00 that afternoon. It was a clear October day, cold enough for breath to show, but warm enough in the sun. The maple trees along the laneway were exactly what Leanne had wanted. Orange and copper and deep red, the whole world lit up like it was burning from the inside. I walked my daughter down that aisle. She was wearing her mother's pearls and a dress she'd spent 6 months choosing, and she looked extraordinary. Theo watched her come toward him with an expression I now knew was a very well-rehearsed performance. I shook his hand at the altar. I looked him in the eye. He smiled at me, that same careful smile, and I thought, he'd enjoy it. That evening at the reception, Leanne and Theo danced their first dance. She laughed at something he said. She looked to everyone watching like a woman completely in love. She is a far better actor than he will ever know. My brother arrived during the dinner hour and sat at the table near the back with a man I didn't recognize, a colleague of his, apparently, former financial crimes unit, now private sector. They ate quietly and didn't make a scene of anything. 2 days after the wedding, Theo sat down across from a notary in a downtown Toronto office to begin the process of adding himself to the title of Leanne's condo. He'd brought the documents himself, had them prepared weeks in advance, apparently. What he hadn't known was that Leanne's lawyer had already been briefed the morning of the wedding. What he also hadn't known was that the notary's office had been selected by us, not by him, and that the recording, along with a full accounting of what my brother had uncovered about 2 previous relationships with similar financial outcomes in 2 other provinces, one in British Columbia, one in Alberta, had already been provided to both the lawyer and a detective from the financial crimes unit of the OPP. When Theo walked into that notary's office, he walked into the end of something he'd been running for years. The marriage was annulled. It took time, and it was not simple. And there were moments when Leanne sat at my kitchen table in Kingston and cried in a way that broke my heart clean open. Not for Theo. She never cried for Theo. She cried for the version of her future she'd believed in, for the October wedding under the burning maples that had turned out to be something else. "I should have seen it," she said one evening. "He made his living on people not seeing it," I told her. "That's not a character flaw in you. It's a skill he deliberately built." She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "You could have just told me, and I might not have believed you." "I know. You waited to get proof because you knew I needed to hear it myself." "I know you," I said. She leaned her head against my shoulder the way she used to when she was small and we'd watch hockey together on Sunday nights. Theo Marsden was charged. Fraud and breach of trust, 2 counts related to previous relationships with the possibility of additional charges to follow as the investigation continued. I don't know where it will end. That part is no longer in my hands. What I do know is this. If I had run into that hallway the first day and confronted him on nothing but my own anger, he would have denied everything, and Leanne might have chosen him anyway. If I had called her that first night in a panic, she would have stood in her wedding dress and been asked to believe her father over the man she loved, with nothing solid to hold on to. Either way, she'd have been left with doubt instead of truth. Sometimes protecting someone means going slow when every instinct says run. I am 63 years old. I am not a perfect father. I made 100 mistakes raising Leanne alone after her mother died, and she will probably tell you about some of them if you ask her. But she is safe. She is whole. She's sitting across from me right now, actually, at this very kitchen table, reading something on her laptop, and drinking the same terrible instant coffee she's been drinking since university, and refusing to upgrade no matter how many times I offer to buy her a proper machine. She looks up and catches me watching her. "What?" she says. "Nothing," I tell her. "Just glad you're here." She rolls her eyes. But she's smiling. That's the whole story. That's all of it. Don't ignore the quiet voice that tells you something is wrong. Not because you should always act on it immediately, but because it deserves to be taken seriously. Write it down. Find the proof. Take the time. The truth is patient, and it is always, always stronger than the lie sitting across the table pretending to shake your hand. I keep coming back to that moment in the hallway, the way my feet stopped before my brain told them to. There was something in his voice, not anger, not cruelty exactly, just a kind of casual confidence, like a man who'd done the math and liked the answer. That's what stays with me, not the betrayal itself, but how ordinary it sounded to him. I've thought a lot about what kind of man Theo was. Not a monster in the way people imagine monsters, not explosive or obviously cruel. He was patient, deliberate. He had built something that looked exactly like love. Down to the small gestures, the right words, at the right moments. And that, I think, is what makes that kind of person so dangerous. They don't fail the obvious tests. They pass every single one. What stopped him wasn't luck. It wasn't that I happened to be in the right hallway at the right time, though that part was luck, I'll admit. What stopped him was that I made a choice in the parking lot of that farmhouse, sitting alone in my truck, to think before I acted. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to walk back inside and confront him, and I chose not to. That choice, the hard, slow, deliberate one, is the only reason Leanne has the life she has today. I'm not telling that part of the story to pat myself on the back. I'm telling it because I genuinely believe it's the most important part. Acting on raw emotion that afternoon would have felt like justice. It would have been satisfying for about 30 seconds. And then Theo would have walked away clean. Leanne would have been left with doubt and heartbreak and no answers. And he would have found someone else to do it to. Doing right by someone you love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's sitting in a cold truck in a parking lot in Caledon, Ontario, drinking nothing, saying nothing, and just thinking. Leanne asked me once, after everything had settled, whether I'd been scared. I had to think about it honestly. I wasn't scared of Theo. What I was scared of was getting it wrong, of moving too fast and losing the one chance we had to protect her properly, not just from him, but from ever having to wonder. That fear, I think, is a useful one. There's a kind of fear that paralyzes you, and there's a kind that sharpens you. The second kind kept me steady through those 2 days. It made me listen to my brother. It made me stand still in the dark on that terrace with my phone recording. It made me call Leanne at 8 in the morning and ask her to trust me before she knew why. What Theo had was cleverness without conscience. And in the end, that combination always collapses under its own weight. Not because the universe is keeping score in some mystical sense, but because people who operate without integrity eventually run out of room. They build on sand. Every choice they make narrows the foundation a little more until there's nothing left to hold the weight of what they've constructed. Leanne rebuilt on solid ground. It took time. It took more courage than I can fully account for, because she had to grieve something real, not just the man, but the future she'd imagined. That kind of grief doesn't follow a schedule. But she got through it, not because she was lucky and not because she was perfect, because she was honest about what had happened and she chose to keep going anyway. That's the only thing that ever really works. Honesty, patience, and the willingness to keep going when it's hard. Not as ideas, as actual daily choices, made again and again, even when no one is watching. I'm still proud of her for that. I'll be proud of her for that for the rest of my life.